right. So that being said, let's get into another kick-ass edition, a crossover edition of Rock and Roll Detention. We have our friends from the Ugly American Werewolf in London podcast. This podcast, they're our Pantheon podcast siblings. Let's welcome to the show, The Wolf in Action Jackson. How are you guys? Welcome to Metal Mayhem ROC.
Hey, boys.
All right.
Thanks for having us. Good to see
Thank
you,
you.
Metal Walt. Good to see you, Verno.
Cool. So moving forward, The Wolf is Mac and Action Jackson's just Jackson. So what we're doing tonight, you know, we like to do these crossover episodes where we take a deep dive into the subject. So tonight what we're doing is 5 classic albums, a run from a particular band. It doesn't have to be debut through their 5th. It could be any stretch of the 5. So we had a brainstorming session a couple weeks ago. We each went and did our heavy metal homework. And tonight we're here to give the results. So just want to introduce Action Jackson and the Wolf to my co-host, Metal Walt. He's down in New Jersey.
Hi, guys. Good to meet you finally. Looking
Metal
forward to
Walt.
this episode. What's
Thank
up,
you,
guys?
my brother. Yeah.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's the black team against the red team. I love it. We got
We are
our
red, by the way, for some reason.
Well, you know, Walt, I'm glad you said that because on a serious note, we're Metal Mayhem ROC and we side more on the hard rock, heavy metal side of things. And where the Ugly American Werewolf in London podcast, they're all over the place. They do rock, they touch on metal, they do a little progressive, and I'm sure they've been known to go even further. So before we get into this, why don't you guys tell us a little more about your podcast and, you know, what our listeners can hopefully get from what you guys are doing?
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thanks, man. No, we're a couple old college roommates who loved rock and roll. It's kind of how we bonded together, you know, and we don't just love the music. We want to know the minutia, right? Who wrote these songs? Where did they record them? Why did they pick these and not the B-sides for the album? You know, all that kind of stuff. And over 30, 35 years, it's just kind of built up, you know. And over the pandemic, I was living in London and we just wanted to stay in touch. So we started Zooming each other about once a week. Hey, how you doing, man? Your folks okay? All that. Then we started giving each other homework like, hey, when's the last time you listened to Fair Warning? Listen to it, and then we'll talk next week, you know, kind of thing. Like, all right, what do you know about the Peter Gabriel Years of Genesis? Listen to Selling England by the Pound, and then you come back to me, you know. And we just kind of realized, you know what? This is a show. We can do 1,000 of these. Whether anyone wants to listen or not, I don't know. But we can do this, brother. So let's share this with the world. So yeah, it's very autobiographical. It's stuff that we've been into over the years. Some stuff I got to do when I was living in Europe. And it's fun. We review classic records. We get legends on and new artists on sometimes too, to talk about what they're up to, concert reviews, and just kind of shoot the shit about the stuff we love.
Yeah, you guys produce some interesting, tasty stuff, and I kick myself for not thinking of some of these topics you have presented before. But yeah, it's real good stuff. So again, it's the Ugly American Werewolf in London podcast right here on Pantheon Music Podcast Group. Okay, well, let's get into this. As always, we're nice hosts. We're gonna let our guests first go. Mac, kick this off. What do you got, my man?
You're too generous, my friend. Okay, so just gotta say it's not easy. Okay, boys. I mean, I could have done a couple different Rush runs, 5 album runs. I could have easily done Maiden or Metallica. But I decided I had to go back to my roots, to one of the bands that really kind of started it all for us. One of my top 3 favorite bands ever, which is Rush, Led Zeppelin, and the Rolling Stones. So I'm going with the Stones from Beggar's Banquet through Goat's Head Soup. And I'm doing that because this was the pinnacle of the Stones in so many ways. And yet they were going through so much shit and hardship that it's amazing they got any of these albums done, let alone all of these albums done. Okay. And from Beggar's Banquet to Let It Bleed, then Sticky Fingers, then Exile on Main Street, and then Goat's Head Soup. We're talking about the best run they did, and at a time where the band could have fallen apart because Brian Jones was becoming worthless. And eventually they had to kick him out of the band, one of the founders of the band. And then they get in Mick Taylor, this young hotshot blues player who was in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and he gives them the best sound that they ever had. This era is the most beloved and most like bootlegged era of the Rolling Stones. And so they made all these amazing classic songs. Meanwhile, their manager, Alan Klein, was screwing them over. So they had to ditch him and then get their own record label on Atlantic Records, Rolling Stone Records, right? And then they get to keep all of their royalties instead of half of them. But then because Alan Klein was keeping that money and they weren't paying their taxes, they had to be tax exiles. So they had to move to the south of France for years and never spend any time in their homeland because they don't have the money to pay their taxes. They wanted 103% from them. So if they made £1 million, they wanted £1,030,000 from them. So they couldn't make it. So they had to live elsewhere, right? Meanwhile, Keith's going through a heroin problem. Oh, and by the way, yeah, they make Gimme Shelter. They make Honky Tonk Woman and Jumpin' Jack Flash and Sympathy for the Devil, Street Fightin' Man, you know, Can't You Hear Me Knocking, Wild Horses, Brown Sugar, Tumbling Dice, all down the line, you know, Happy, Angie, Heartbreaker, all this amazing music, which still sustains them today. I got a prop behind me, right over there. That's a set list from when I took my daughter. That's a set list from when I took my daughter to see them in Hyde Park in 2022. Half the set list is from this record, these 5 records, you know. 50 years later, they still play these all the time. These are the 5 albums that let the Stones continue to this day, you know. And yeah, they did 500,000 people in Hyde Park in '69. They also did 500,000 people in California at Altamont, poster of it right up there, where someone got murdered, right? But the 72 World Tour, which is what that picture of Keith right above my head is from right there, it's what changed big time rock and roll touring. Because in the 60s, you know, the Beatles would go on and the chicks would scream for an hour and then they run off, right? But you get to the 70s, now people are going to sit, they want to listen to what you have to play. They're not just going to scream and go nuts like a bunch of kids. Mm-hmm. So it was these albums which allowed them to do that tour, which showed to people this rock and roll business is sustainable. And the reason we still have big stadium tours, a big part of it is from that tour right there. And because they had these strength of songs to do that and to still do it today.
You know, Mac, I am really glad that you pulled out the Stones for this, because I'm going to tell you something. I've been going to shows since 1980, and I have never seen the Rolling Stones. And just recently, I've been watching some of these YouTube clips of Mick Jagger coming out at 80 plus years old, or however old Mick is, and doing Start Me Up. And I did look at the set list, and when you were reciting what they're playing now, or what they were playing then, all their hits, it's exactly what they're playing now. So your point is well made, that these are timeless classics. And I'm going to make it a point to go see the Rolling Stones. And besides to complete my concert library.
Got to check that box. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's all I have Mac, at this point.
Hey, Mac, how many, those 5 albums covered, how long of a period was that?
Okay, yeah. So they recorded Beggar's Banquet in April, June of '68. And then they released Goat's Head Soup August '73. So just about 5 years.
Yeah. That's an amazing accomplishment, but it was very much synonymous with the times, right?
That's right.
It was, you could pump out a couple albums a year, but it wasn't out of the norm that a band could put out 5, 6, 7 albums in 6 years. Something is unheard of in this modern day of music.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah. If you get one in less than 3 years, you're pretty psyched about that these days. Yeah. But that was the business of it. You had to do an album a year. And in fact, the 1970, they didn't release an album, an original one. However, they released Get Your Yayas Out, which is certainly at the time was regarded as one of the best live albums ever. It just kind of captured it well. The legendary Lester Bangs said, "This is the best concert ever recorded for a live album." And it was one that was bootlegged, I think, very heavily. So the Stones said, "Screw it, you guys are going to bootleg it. We'll put out our own and make the money ourselves." But it started with Jumpin' Jack Flash. That was in the Beggars Banquet sessions, but they liked it, so they put it out as a single in May of '68, and then they put out Beggars Banquet in December of '68 without Jumpin' Jack Flash, just a non-album single, but from those sessions. So it deserved to be on Beggar's Banquet.
Now, to expand on Walt's point, so back then it's analog, so they couldn't put more than 40 minutes. And a lot of those older albums, did these Stones albums subscribe to the all killer, no filler? Because how many tracks were on these? 7, 8? Because you ran down the list of this 5 album period, and that is the Rolling Stones' greatest hits. You rambled off 20 of them.
Yeah.
So what did these albums consist of? How many songs were on here, and were there any filler?
I mean, there may be some that I don't love. Most of them had about 10 songs on them. Exile's a double album that had 18. So you're looking at, between 55 and 60 original songs. And that's the other thing, coming up through the 60s, they had a lot of covers. I mean, from 62 to 65, there's a lot of covers on those albums and those singles and those B-sides. But now you're just getting a couple, right? There's 2 on the double album. There's 1 on Let It Bleed. There's just a few in there. There's still more than 50 original Stones tunes in that run.
Well, what were some of the covers? Were they old blues or gospel?
For the most part, they're old blues. Was it Robert Wilkins? Originally did A Prodigal Son, which was on Beggar's Banquet. And there were a couple on the Exile, because you've got 18 songs, you've got a little more space to run there. But I don't think there were none on Goat's Head, and I don't think there was one on Sticky Fingers either. So here, let's see, Exile. Real quick on my notes. Sorry to take up here. Stop Breaking Down is a Robert Johnson song that was on Exile. And Slim Harpo did Shake Your Hips originally. Also, that was on Exile. So, I mean, old blues stuff, kind of going back to what they were doing when they first got started.
Sure, it was a different time too. And you're coming off of the 50s and early 60s where singles were the driving force. Full-length LPs, they didn't really gain momentum until this run. So,
well, and the other thing is they're finally world weary enough to be able to write some blues and real rock songs of their own. I mean, from 63 to 67, let's call it, Mick Jagger's like 19 to 23 years old. Now he's in like 24, getting to be 29, 30 years old, right? So you understand a little bit more. They've been screwed over in business. They've had some relationships. Yeah. They've toured the world. They're ready to tell their own stories.
You mentioned drug use. When did the drug use prevalent from the start of the band through the heyday, or what was going on? How did the drug use come about?
So, I mean, I think it was just kind of part of it back in the 60s and certainly the 70s, right? Yeah, I think they all liked to drink at one point or another. A few of them got busted for pot. Keith certainly did. Mick got arrested for it. But they were doing a lot worse things than pot. And of course, Keith had a wicked heroin addiction, which started, I think, in the late 60s. It was around this time. I think it was part of the reason that Mick Taylor, who, again, as the foil to Keith, that was easily his best co-guitar player. He was a little more straight. He didn't get so into that. And yeah, Keith would even sing songs like Coming Down again. When they lived in the south of France recording Exile on Main Street in this mansion, basically they were waiting for Keith to wake up from his heroin, get a riff together, and then come down and share it with the band so they can make a song out of it.
What was that, Gary? You had a comment on
drug stupor that he was in. And it sucked too because I knew he was going to do this. So I'm like, oh, you took the good one. But yeah, the fact that this run is what let them continue to be popular today. I mean, they're still selling out stadiums in the United States based on this material. Like, yeah, they had hits later on, Start Me Up and everything. That's great. But the hardcore fans, this is the golden era of the Stones.
That's right.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's awesome. I grew up with when I was younger. I'm 56, and I remember early 70s. I had an aunt that was much younger than my mother, so she was only 10 years older than I was.
Yeah.
And I remember that just she used to babysit us and like Alice Cooper in 72 and the Stones. And I have these memories of the Rolling Stones selling out Rich Stadium in Buffalo in like 75. And you see these pictures of those Stones concerts and stadiums, and there's just 100,000 people. I love the 70s. I really appreciate this one, Mac. I'm going to do my, well, it's not heavy metal homework, it's rock and roll homework.
All right. Well, all right. Definitely check out the Brussels Affair. It was a very popular bootleg. I think they did eventually do an official release of it. A lot of people think that is capturing the Stones at their very best. I think it was from 73.
Okay, I will. All right. Well, I'm going to send it over to my partner, and I have a feeling he's going to be somewhere closer to your side of things on this one. So, Metal Walt, what do you got, my friend?
Well, I will tell you, I as well made a list, and I wrote out notes on 3 bands, and for a week and a half, I've been struggling what to go with. And I've decided this morning I'm going to stick with my number 2 choice, not my number 1 choice. And I think there's good reason for that. So the band I'm going to reveal soon, again, this band is synonymous, where at times they're referred to as a certain Mark lineup. Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4. And you know, when this band came out in the late 60s, they were kind of in that post-mod sound, a little English progressive, you know, really hard to connect with that sound. And 2 of the founding members decided that they wanted to go ahead in a more straightforward, hard rocking sound. So out went Rod Evans and Nick Simper, and in came Ian Gillan and Roger Glover. And what was to come became the classic, iconic Mark II lineup of legendary British rock band Deep Purple.
Yeah.
Deep Purple to me I'm going to be 54 in a few weeks. I missed the boat on so many of these bands, but like John, I remember my brother and sister and cousin who lived in the same house as me, who were anywhere from 10 to 12 years older, had all the LPs all the time around. And my sister had a boyfriend who was infatuated with Richie Blackmore. He went to see Rainbow at the Beacon Theater. I just remember the T-shirts and the albums always being around me as a little boy. But more importantly, what this band did in a period of from 1970 to 1973. So, Mac, like you said with the Stones, it was a short window of time, but they put out 4 great studio albums and 1 iconic live album. And there's a 5-album period there, from In Rock to Fireball to Machine Head to Made in Japan to Who Do We Think We Are? And by the end of that period and those 5 albums, you know, as quickly as Gillan and Glover came in, they went out. And you know what was it a byproduct of is they changed their sound. They came in with In Rock. I mean, just seeing that cover, it was the Mount Rushmore cover with the band faces on the album cover. It was where their sound completely changed, and it's synonymous with the Deep Purple sound that we know. But think of the songs on here, right? Speed King, Child in Time, and then Black Knight was an afterthought. Black Knight was thrown on there as they didn't have a single, and they wrote this and put this in after the album was done, and it probably became the biggest song on the album. But it was funny. Today I was just doing a little reading on a fan site, and Roger Glover recently commented on the song off this album called Hard Lovin' Man, where he said that was their breakthrough song, because before they would be able to record these songs in the studio, but they didn't translate live. And he said when they wrote that song in the studio, there was no way it couldn't be done the same way in the studio as it could be done live. And he said he remembers John Lord pounding on that organ, the guitars got heavier, and he said from that moment on, the songs they wrote would always be equivalent to what they played on stage. But as you saw the band, let's say, mature, Fireball comes next. It became number one in the UK. You had the title track, great tracks like Strange Kind of Woman, and excellent deep tracks. No, 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 Anyone's Daughter, No One Came. Then you get to Machine Head. Now, again, we don't even have to discuss the Machine Head album. It's their signature album. It spawned the greatest guitar riff of all time in Smoke on the Water. The autobiographical story behind the song of Montreux and the Frank Zappa studios and everything that went down, the mobile recording. And that album, it's just end to end, like the Stones. You go see Deep Purple in 2024, these guys in their upper 70s, they have lineup changes. You're still going to hear Smoke, Highway Star, Pictures of Home, Lazy, and Space Truckin', guaranteed. Whether you're sick of them or not, you're going to hear them. And then you get into, let's say, the period of the live albums from these eras where every band had one that was, wow, that was an iconic live album from that band. Now, Made in Japan, one of the greatest live albums of all time. It was, recorded partially in Tokyo and Osaka. Martin Birch, who did a lot of their producing on their studio albums, came in and mixed it. Yet you go on record and they state that there are no over recordings, no overdubs. These are the original recordings. But what you got that was very, very unique was you got songs that maybe there's 6 or 7 songs on the standard album, but Child in Time clocks in at 12 minutes, Lazy at 11 minutes, Space Truckin' 19 minutes. I mean, Space Truckin' on Machine Head was probably 4.5 to 5. And this is where it solidified this band as an early progressive sound. You had 5 musicians in there. Well, if you take Gillan out, 5 musicians that were masters of their craft. They had orchestrated sounds. They came from John Lord, could have been a classical piano player. Richie Blackmore was the maestro in himself, but this showcased their talents live. The final chapter of that was Who Do We Think We Are? Now, it was a little bit of a struggle for me because overall it's not a great album, I would say, but it's an important album because the point of it is this was typical of the times where bands put out too many albums too quick. They were probably fueled on drugs and booze. They were burnt out. They were fighting. Their egos were in the way. They had money. And maybe had this band taken a little bit of a break for a year or two, they still would have carried on. But what happens? The record company pushes them. Band goes into friction. They burn out. Yeah, they got the song Woman from Tokyo, which became an FM staple out there. But a year or two later, out go Glover and Gillan, in come David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, and now you get into Deep Purple Mark III, which is now their funky sound. And but as short as that was, and that period was great, maybe we should be thankful of it because it then spawned careers of Richie Blackmore eventually going to Rainbow and the amazing Ian Gillan solo catalog and him moving on to Black Sabbath to do the Born Again album. And eventually these guys reuniting and then all the little offshoots of Rainbow, the different singers, which Graham Bonnet, which turned into MSG. And, that tree that started with this Mach 2 lineup eventually spawned 50 years later of amazing rock and hard rock and metal albums. So that's why I think this is a golden period and an amazing 5 albums for Deep Purple.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. I got a couple questions. Let me get right into them. Drugs, were they heavy into drugs? Hard Loving Man, what do you mean they couldn't do it? They couldn't do it live? Or this was the start of, if we can't do it live, we're not going to record it? And explain this Mach 1, Mach 2, Mach 3. That's always confused me.
Well, the lineups basically, because after Mach 3, which was the Glenn Hughes, David Coverdale stage, eventually Mach 2 came back for Perfect Strangers, but then Blackmore leaves again. In comes Joe Satriani, then Steve Morse. So every time they had a change of and there's Joe Lynn Turner album in between. So basically, because so many guys coming in and out, every time there was a change, they said, okay, this is no longer a lineup. So it's lineup 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's why it's defined as Mach 2.
Well,
Mark II.
wasn't Mach 1 the original Deep Purple? And I thought Mach 2 was David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. And what's the deal with them? They both sang, but Hughes played bass because Glover wasn't there.
Yeah, so Mark 1 was Rod Evans and Nick Simper. They were the original Deep Purple.
Okay.
Along
And they
with
did
Richie
Hush.
Black.
Their big song
Yes.
was Hush, but that's
Right.
kind of all they did, kind of.
Yes. Yeah. And that was like 68, 69, and you're right.
Okay.
John, the point on the Hard Lovin' Man song was when they wrote it in the studio, they said, however the song was written, it came across with such aggression in the studio. They knew at that point in time that there was no turning back, that anything they were going to write was going to be performed and portrayed the same way on stage, which maybe some of the prior material, like maybe like a song like Black Knight or something like that, or Speed King, you know, you hear it on the album and it comes across as, it's okay. I mean, listen, guys, the four of us, how many studio albums do we listen to of old tracks and you say, oh, yeah, well, it's okay on album, but my God, if you saw them live, it comes alive, right? It's different. It's like a different song, and it's almost
Every
boring
Kiss
to hear
track,
it on a studio.
basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks on the clarification on that. And what about the drugs? Were they doing? I've never heard of Deep Purple doing heroin. Were they drinkers? They were a little higher brow.
Yeah,
I always thought.
I think so. I don't think there's anything that said drugs fueled them. I'm sure they were partiers and whatever they were doing, but nothing that necessarily got in the way of the demise. I think it really was ego, and it was mainly Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore. They were still to this day. They don't speak to each other, and they're in their upper 70s, pushing 80. So
I don't know if Richie talks to anybody other than Candace Knight, man. I don't know anyone who's like, oh, I got to talk to Richie. He's doing great. You never hear that.
No.
I know if I don't think Blackmore does much media, but on the rare occasion you'll see an interview, I know that I'm fairly certain the press is not allowed to talk about Deep Purple or any of the guys there, and has to keep to Candace and the Blackmore's Night and that kind of thing. So.
Well, can I get two things in, please, Verno?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, man. So, Walt, great pick here, man. Love it. Two things. One, after living in Europe for 4 years, Deep Purple may be kings in America, but in Europe, they are gods. Okay, they are so much more big time. And you say they're an influence on hard rock. They are in America, absolutely. But in Europe, it's like Zeppelin, Sabbath, Deep Purple, they're all together, and if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame were in London or somewhere in Europe, Deep Purple would have waited 25 years. Okay. It would have taken like 2 at the most, right? They would have been right in. But the second thing you brought up was the covers. And yes, that helps make it iconic. I didn't mention that on the Stones run, but with the iconic Andy Warhol with the zipper on Sticky Fingers, or the Beggar's Banquet that was a dirty bathroom with a bunch of graffiti that they couldn't sell in all markets, so they made a nice white, invitation they had to make that the cover because they weren't allowed to market that everywhere. Or the Goat's Head Soup, with Mick's face in it, or the alternative Sticky Fingers with the fingers coming out of the can. That helps make them iconic. And yes, the faces on In Rock, or is it Come Taste the Band? I'm trying to remember of the Burn, with the candles. It's iconic, it's part of rock and roll legend and lore. And obviously that's a big part of why these are classic records.
Absolutely. And Mac, thank you for pointing out the importance of Deep Purple outside of the US, because it sickens me, and I'll never ever miss Deep Purple as long as they're going to continue to play. But they're just lumped in with classic rock. They're touring with Yes, but over in Europe, they have audiences from seniors to adults to grandkids. It's a much different. They're a relevant band. But I'm really happy that still in this day and age, they're yet again putting out another new album in 2024. That makes me fucking happy.
And even though we get caught up a lot on the guitar angle, and Richie Blackmore, I will never say that he's not a guitar god, but John Lord in that band manning that organ, that just makes it something a little bit different, something a little special.
Absolutely. And it made their sound unique. It made their sound unique. I mean, and like I said, it spawned many, many, many decades of additional bands that tried to carry a little bit of that sound, I mean, who doesn't love the sound of the Hammond organ? But you can't name another Hammond organ player on top of your head, can you? I can't think of another one. Don Barry, who's the current Deep Purple player. That's about it.
Oh, another good one. Another good one. Thank you. Well, Gary, not sure where you're going on this. Your choice. Okay. Well, let's pick one because I'm looking forward to this. What do you got, my friend?
So we originally talked about, we threw some ideas around in the planning session, and the original idea was 5 albums from the beginning. We didn't land on that, but that stuck in my head. And I thought, what am I going to do? This is a big choice to make. I could go a couple of different ways. I knew Mac was going to do the Stones, so I kind of put that away. And I thought, you know what? You also mentioned something about the metal homework. Like do some homework, do some more digging into things. And I thought, now wait a minute. How are the planets going to line up with 5 iconic albums from a hard rock band? And maybe I'm not super familiar with everything, but I want to be. So I went back to the beginning and I picked Black Sabbath. And I've always been a fan of them, but over the last, I don't know, when did we start doing this? A week and a half, 2 weeks? Now I'm a super fan because they kick all ass known to man, and they started the amount of bands that are influenced by Sabbath. It's what we listen to now would not have been if it weren't for these 4 guys. And I understand they'd had some lineup changes and they went through some rough spots, especially with Ozzy kind of at the end of his run. But to me, these first 5 albums are fantastic.
Oh, oh my God, it's my youth.
Yeah,
it's my fucking youth. I'm not gonna. I could probably recite the first 5 in order, but let me ask you. You said you took a deep dive into Sabbath. Give me 3 things that you pulled out of it that you're like, oh my fucking God.
Okay.
Because
so the original, the first record has, Black Sabbath, it has The Wizard, it has NIB. Okay, I know all of that. Paranoid, that's the big one. Everybody knows that, blah, blah, blah. Master of Reality is probably one of the heaviest records I've ever listened to. But the sleeper in here for me was Volume 4. I'd never really listened to that all that much. It's really good. You've got like Supernaut is fantastic. Snowblind. They wanted to name the record Snowblind because they were coked out of their minds at that time. It doesn't get more rock and roll than that. And with the record company says you can't do that. Not that anybody would know what it was, but I mean, the fact, and that was the other thing too, the fact that they were so out there and yet still managed to keep it together and write these records is amazing to me.
Oh, well, yeah, it's well, they're just like Deep Purple, and I'll compare it to Deep Purple in the sense that these guys were at the top of their field and their instruments. Tony Iommi, the riff master, had that accident where his fingers were gone. Geet Butler, my God, bass players today. Geezer Butler is, he's on his own wing of the, and Bill Ward. Bill Ward was a beast. Him and John Bonham, those guys were killer. And Ozzy's always been Ozzy. He's always surrounded himself with great talent, but he was a great talent himself.
Yeah, it definitely a unique voice that doesn't sound like anybody else, kind of set the tone for these first records. But you were mentioning, Iommi, and he gets the riff master. You think of probably Iron Man is his most iconic riff that everybody would know. But then you go and you listen to like Laguna Sunrise, and he's playing the acoustic guitar. You think, wait, this dude's got a lot more depth than he gets credit for.
Yeah. Mac, you wanted to chirp in. What do you got?
Well, I can't disagree that they're fantastic records, and they created the sound of heavy metal that we all love, that has descended into all these bands that we love. And I actually like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath a lot. A lot of people talk about the first four; that was the real run. But I would include Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath in that. And then the next three with Ozzy were kind of, there's some hit and miss there. They're starting to go off the rails. The only thing is, to me, and I know to purists, I'll get blasted for this. But to me, still to this day, my favorite Black Sabbath album is Heaven and Hell. And that's not in that run. And you can't make a 5-album run with Heaven and Hell in it and defend it,
That was the problem. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with you on that. Heaven and Hell is fantastic. Ronnie is 1,000 times the singer that Ozzy is. But yeah, you're right. Those ones in the middle are rough. That you can't do it. But the other fact too is they were pumping stuff out. I was thinking one of my other choices was going to be Metallica, and so they started in what? So if you did 5 albums from then, it would have been 83 to 91. This was 1970 to 1973. So in 3 years, you put out 5 albums. You never stopped. I mean, unless you were going to do cocaine, a lot of that. But other than that, you were either touring or you were writing records. And the fact too, you were talking about Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, the whole deal where they go to the castle. They're in California, in Bel Air. They're like, this isn't working. We're out of here. They go back. They rent the castle out, and they get to the point where they won't even go to sleep because they're afraid somebody's going to mess with them. I think Bill Ward ended up sleeping with a dagger next to him because he was so petrified that they were going to come in and mess with him in the middle of the night. It's fantastic.
Because he was so high on coke.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
you're in an old castle. You're already hearing and seeing things, and now you're going to mess with that. But to think about that riff for Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and apparently Iommi was in the dungeon or whatever of this place, and it just came to him born out of this disgusting dark place was this fantastic riff.
I love
Gary, I'm so happy you made this selection because that was on my list as well. And I crossed off Sabbath because they were a top 5 band for me. And only because I struggled stopping at Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, because to me, my album run would go through Sabotage. And I said, I can't stop. It's got to be 6. Like, to me, it's like, okay, we'll forget Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die. But to me, I was like, if it's got to be a 5-album run, Sabbath is out because it's a 6-album run to me. And that's how passionate I am about Sabbath. Because although I agree, maybe Sabotage is maybe a little bit less of quality, but I think it's lumped in with those first albums.
The more I thought about this, and the more I was just cycling through bands in my head. This is not the easiest thing to do because you're right. There always is that, but then there was that one that was meh. So you really can't do that. You can't, or if you're gonna like this one, you're gonna write in between Ozzy and Ronnie. Yeah, there is so harder than it seems.
I'm a big 80s, like the Ronnie James Dio forward. I could probably tell you too much stuff about the Tony Martin years and the 7 Star album. I know that stuff in and out just as much as the Ozzy stuff. I've driven John crazy with it, but those are all great albums in their own right. But it's not it's like a roller coaster with that sequence of things.
Yeah.
You don't drive me crazy. You make me I'm in awe, but I'm like, I thought I was a Sabbath fan, and he's bringing out stuff from like Headless Cross. Then I'm like, oh my God, I got to go back and do my heavy amount of homework. But going back to Sabotage, the Symptoms of the Universe, the Hole in the Sky, the Writ. I'm with Walt. You need to, the only band that rivals the 6-pack is Van Halen. And can I go into mine, or you want to finish up?
I am good. Go right ahead.
Now, I'm not going to do Van Halen, but Van Halen's my favorite band. And like Sabbath, they were pumping that out. Van Halen 1, 78. Van Halen 2, 79. Women and Children First, 80. Fair Warning, 81, with a little bit of tour, well, a lot of touring around that, and a lot of what they used to call coke, crawl. That's what Van Halen called it. But the band I'm going to go to really pulled from 2 or 3 bands, Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. And I am going to go with Metallica. And the thing with Metallica, it holds a very special place in my history. I got into the band as soon as they came around on the Kill 'Em All. We've documented the whole Metallica, Rochester, New York connection many times over. They recorded the first album here. But more importantly, the thing with Metallica was everything they've done from the minute that Lars and James got together has been exceptional, groundbreaking, and just setting the trends. The band essentially formed in late 81, early 82. They secured a single on that Metal Massacre album. Fast forward a year, their second major gig, they're opening for Saxon, who was the kings of the new wave of traditional heavy metal. It's 7 months into this band's formation, and they're making these leaps that are unprecedented. Spring of 83, they come to Rochester, they record an album. Summer of 83, they're on tour with Raven, who's another powerhouse in that new wave of traditional. That fall, they're in Europe headlining, these they're playing these festivals. And like, Purple and the Stones and Sabbath, they were on that one album a year cycle. But these albums, Kill 'Em All, legendary. Ride the Lightning was such an advancement and filled with classic tracks like Sabbath, like Purple. These are Hall of Fame songs. Ride the Lightning, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black. They're still staples in their sets. Then, a year later, again, groundbreaking achievements. Master of Puppets, opening for Ozzy, their hero, Sabbath. And then, we all know the story. And listeners, if you don't know the story of Metallica, this is your chance to do heavy metal homework. But when they lose Cliff Burton in the fall of 86, again, they don't replace him. Let me rephrase that. They invite Jason Newsted into the band. They don't miss a beat. And now the next chapter of Metallica comes about. Just amazing. Every single level that they did, they're headlining at this point. They do now I have to call a little variable here. I'm doing 5.5 albums because Walt brought it out to me. He goes, well, Vern, technically the 5-album run ends at And Justice for All because in 87 they had the 598 EP. But I'm not counting that because that was just a chance for them to start working in the new studio they got and just to see how Jason was in the studio. But it's a great album. It's a fantastic album. And Justice, again, breaking ground. The first time they had a video with One. And going ahead to 1999, MTV put that One video in the top 25 all-time videos ever on MTV. They get on that Monsters of Rock tour with Van Halen in 1988. This is 5 years after really they started. And that doesn't even, And Justice for All, tour with Queensryche, the 10 million albums, and then the Black Album, and that speaks for itself. Just so what I'm really trying to say is that Metallica run is unprecedented. It's like the Stones, like the only other bands that you can compare it to, unfortunately, like Led Zeppelin are not here, but they're still playing stadiums. Metallica does it on their terms. They own their own master tapes. They have their own record label. They have their own printing plant. They do these tours. Walt and I have been fortunate enough to be guests of them for the last couple of years, summers, under these tours that are just amazing. And they're not stopping. They're not stopping. So I put Metallica in that list of the Rolling Stones with Deep Purple, with Black Sabbath. It just so happens it's our generation, but they've earned it. They've earned it.
No doubt.
So, okay. now I'm curious because Mac and I are a little bit younger than you are, so we kind of caught up to them not right off the bat.
Hmm.
Being a fan in 1983 from the beginning, how did you feel when the Black Album came out? Because I know there were a lot of that caused a rift between the hardcore fans that they were moving in a new direction. How did you feel about that?
Fucking loved it, man.
Yeah.
Loved it because I
Nice.
grew up with it. And it's a great question. I wasn't at one of those, oh, fuck that, just ride the lightning like you hear it now. It's everything you know what? That's my point. Everything they did was huge. These videos. And I'm going to tell you something. To this day, I will listen to the Black Album over Injustice for All, mainly
Okay.
because Injustice for All I saw that 2 or 3 times and not bragging, but I consumed that so much. And now when you go back and listen to it, and the band will even admit this, that there's a lot of excess there. They were at a bad place. They weren't sure what they were doing. But to finally answer your question, I love the Black Album. To this day, I still love Enter Sandman. You can't tell me that is a killer song. Sad but true. Wherever I may roam.
So, you have a problem when I was walking my dog a week, 2 weeks ago, and there's kind of a path down one side of the neighborhood that I have, and I'm walking the dog, and somebody's outside, and they're playing Enter Sandman, and I'm all by myself, and I go into the solo on air guitar, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. I'm like, oh hey, no one saw me just standing here with my dog air guitaring. But you're right, it still sounds awesome. I've heard that record a million times. Wherever I may roam, with that boom when it starts off, that album kicks ass.
Yeah, and here's a fun fact doing research. They remixed that album 3 times when they're in the studio with Bob Rock, spent over $1 million, and both Lars and Kirk lost marriages because of the time they took there. And then the tour, 3.5 years,
Oh,
just around the globe. So they had like the Michael Jackson effect. They had like 5 singles that were on the charts. And as close as like 2018, it was still reported through the official selling agency. I forget the name of it. They're moving 5,000 units a week of that.
mm,
That
amazing.
is a gateway. That AC/DC Back in Black, Guns N' Roses, those are the creme de la creme of hard rock and heavy metal.
Yeah, and you're right, Bud, because it's the progression from one album to the next. They kept growing as musicians. They kept growing as songwriters. We talked about Heaven and Hell. I love it. Mob Rules, I also like it, but they kind of just tried to run it back. Like, oh, that worked. Well, let's do that again. That's not what Metallica did. They would grow. They would keep moving forward. Yes, they might refine some stuff that from when Dave was in the band, still even on Master of Puppets, but they made it amazing. They didn't just say, okay, let's dust this off and put it out. No, they reworked it into some of the greatest metal of all time. And not a lot happened. But I mean, all they did was tour and make these records, those first 5 years especially. And yeah, they had to take some time when Cliff died. But yeah, they just kept marching forward, and without a whole lot of help from FM radio or MTV. They did it their own way, and that's why today they can still do it their own way, because they've always done it that way.
No MTV until and Justice for All. Yeah, for one. But they sort of circled back on their original statement, saying, we won't do a video and this and that. Back in 85, 86, I was studying radio and TV broadcasting in high school, and we did have a heavy metal show on Friday nights, and we were the outlets like me, college radio and educational cable or college access stations playing that. And we were lucky enough back then to interview Metallica in '86 when they came to town with Ozzy. But when I say I was there, I was with them on that step. And you're right. you're right. Every step was bigger and better. And to answer your question again, Gary, by the time the Black Album, it was just another huge step. And then they reinvented themselves. I'm going to tell you one thing. After all that, and then '94 comes around, I remember going to our local record store and getting Load and buying it and opening it up. And I open it up and I'm like, all right, who are these guys in,
Short
1930 Chicago, wardrobe on, smoking cigars? But in a way, they
But-
didn't. What are they going to do?
Yeah, but to Mac's point before, they could have run the Black Album back for the next one. It could have been the same thing, but they decided, no, we're going to do something different. It kind of soured some people, but it was not the same thing.
Let me ask you, you guys see, when did you get into Metallica, and when did you start seeing the band live, if you ever have?
Got into them. We probably got into them about the same time in high school, like when Injustice came out.
Right.
And then I heard the second one I ever heard was Ride the Lightning, and I said, "This is fantastic." And then we were there for the launch of the Black Album. So by that point, we were fans. And then the only time I've ever got to see him is with Mac on the Black Tour, and then he's seen them several times after that.
Yeah,
Now,
when we
what-
lived together, the Black Album was the biggest thing in the world, and we did go see them together in Florida on that tour.
Okay. Yeah, so college, that's what happened. The frat boys used to, call us potheads, burners, listening to our metal. And then 2 years later, every frat house, I was in college at the time when that came out. It was Metallica, the Black Album, Nirvana, Nevermind, Cypress Hill, and then you had yeah, and then a little Pantera was out there, and Red Hot Chili Peppers. It was that 90 to 92. It was a great time, great time. So, Walt, you were down in New York. Did you happen to be involved with that Madison Square Garden listening party of Metallica when the Black Album came out?
I was not, but I've seen many classic Metallica shows. I was at that parking lot gig in Philadelphia in '97, I think it was, when Reload came out and they played in the Spectrum parking lot 4:30 in the afternoon on Tuesday. But to me, Metallica wasn't the first one of the first metal bands I learned. I had to learn them. I came on board at 19 for Injustice for All. But at that point, I was sold, and I followed them. And just like everybody else, it couldn't get bigger than the Black Album. And maybe there was maybe a bit of a lull or a disappointment afterwards. But yet, anytime they came around, I was always there. I went to see them in the stadiums, the amphitheaters. No matter what they did, I'm going to support these guys no matter what go forward. I mean, up until this past year. So, and John and I, again, we had the great opportunity of having an interview with Kirk Hammett this past fall. I mean, who would have ever thought we'd get to that point in our career here
So
at
cool,
Metal Mayhem
yes.
ROC?
Yeah, yeah. Well said. And the thing with Metallica and Deep Purple and the Stones, and what you guys are talking about is these songs. The 40 years. These bands have been around. Metallica active for 43 years. It's amazing. Where else are you going to hear these? Of course, you're going to hear these songs. So, Sabbath, that era, and the thing with the Sabbath, going back to what you were saying, Gary, I love Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. It's a different band. It's not.
Yeah.
The music is different. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. The first 6-pack of VH with David Lee Roth and the Sammy here, 8 years, but those are different bands, same musicians. But when you start adding like a Ronnie James Dio or a Sammy Hagar, Sammy's his ability to sing that opened the door for Eddie to compose other stuff. It was just different and maturing. But I love Black Sabbath. It's one of my favorites. Black Sabbath.
There is something to be said for having the same mixture there the whole time. You know, with the Stones, they've had people in and out, but it's always been Mick and Keith. So to have that core there, that kind of keeps it fresh.
Well, and these bands that have played for so long, all of them but Sabbath are still going in one form or another, right?
Right.
And Ozzy's trying to wrap things up, but Sabbath did it for about 50 years, right? I mean, close, right? Purple's at like 55 years or something like that. Stones are more than 60 years. And the reason that all these bands can keep doing that are because of these 5 album runs that we're all talking about here today.
Absolutely.
Well, now you say that, and one thing with the Metallica thing, though, every time we go to see him, James always says, you know, how many new people do we have to the family? And there's you see people there, and there's actually people that don't like the beginning. They prefer the Load and Reload and Death Magnetic and Hardwired and 72 Seasons. That was their Metallica. They appreciate it. And just, guys, we all can agree that a lot of this is how you grew up on it. There's people that, and so when someone discovers a Metallica during the Load, and they fell in love, that's their Metallica. It's not right, it's not wrong. Hey, more the merrier. And going back to your question, Gary, about was I a fan of the Black Album? I consider all our rock and roll bands that we follow as old friends. I could put on an old AC/DC Power Age album. I could be having a shitty ass day, but as long as I visit my old friend Bon Scott and Angus, it lifts me up. Walt, I know he has said it time and time again. When we did the Kirk Hammett interview, him and Kirk are geeking over some B track from some 14th singer of Purple that no one ever heard. But they're both like, it's Kirk Hammett. I mean, they're equal, Kirk Hammett and Metal Walt, but they're like going back and forth, and that's what's awesome. That is what's awesome.
To clarify that, I had I had no contribution to the discussion because it was about Kill 'Em All Rochester. So the Jersey piece was around him surfing with Rob on the Jersey Shore and our mutual love for Deep Purple. And I invited myself to the sound check, and I said I want to play the song "Getting Tighter" from Come Taste the Band with Metallica. And I will tell you, Kirk didn't say no.
He didn't say no, and that's what we do here. We swing for the fence. We have a publicist contact that you just got to ask. So,
That's
all right,
amazing.
well, Gary and Mac, 1 minute on the clock for each of you. What was your other choice?
Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind through Seventh Son. It was very hard not to pick that.
I was going to say I was on the fence between Van Halen and I was thinking Led Zeppelin also.
But which Zeppelin? Because I was thinking I could do Houses of the Holy through and through the Outdoor, and no one else would pick that, and I would love that.
I was thinking about I was stuck on the first. I got stuck on the first 6 albums only because you had to include the original, and I love that. I love that first Led Zeppelin record also.
what Van Halen were you gonna do?
I was going to do the first 5 also. I'm a big. I mean, as much as I like
And
Sandy
leave out
Rayburn,
1984.
Yeah, you know what? That was the deal. You can't. So if I put in 1984, I got to leave out the first one.
Right.
So no, I'm putting in the first one. Yeah.
Oh, they're both diamond albums.
Right.
But
right.
yeah, but you got to go
that's
one.
the tough part. And that's the thing is you can't say, you know what? I'm just going to leave out Diver Down. You can't do that.
Right. It's a hard exercise.
Yes.
Mac, I got to ask you, why Peace of Mind? When you're,
It's for the guy Bruce. Basically one of the greatest free agent pickups in the history of rock and roll to get Bruce Dickinson as your singer. They already had Adrian in, so they had to kind of smooth out Clive Burr, who wasn't a bad drummer. He just, I guess, didn't fit in or wasn't professional, but they still got an upgrade with Nico. And then that was the classic run of those albums. It's what got me into Maiden. It's why I still like to see them do, we took Jackson to see them in Europe last summer. It was on the Somewhere Back in Time tour. or I'm sorry, that's not what the name was. But anyway, those were
Future
albums we loved
Past.
together. Yes, Future Past, and they got heavy into Somewhere in Time, excuse me. And that was just personally for the two of us how we found the band in the first place, and those songs still kick ass today.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even going to tell you, but I did see those tours. But Number of the Beast, Number of the Beast. That's my favorite Maiden album. But then again, that goes back to that point of my life, but I just love that album. I think it's great. I love Clive Burr, but that's how it is. All right, listeners, this is what we're going to do. We're each going to share these. We're going to do polls and find out. You're going to be the judge and vote for which one of these 4 selections you think is the top 5 album run. And, no one's going to win anything, but we're just going to see what the listeners think and get some kind of gauge. So that's what we have. Any parting shots, guys? Anything you want to say before we get going?
Real quick, I'm sorry, my pick would have been Number of the Beast through Seventh Son. Sorry, that's the 5 albums. Sometimes I flip-flop Peace of Mind and Number of the Beast. That's the 5 album run, so that's my bad, but that's what it was. You're right.
Now you feel better.
But I thought maybe you went the other way because of Clive Burr, and Peace of Mind was the first one with Nico. But all right,
for the record, guys, my second choice was The Police. They only put out 5 studio albums,
and they're all awesome.
My second choice.
Yeah, they were definitely in the run for me also, and I was actually on the fence about that because the same thing. They only had 5 records. They were something that nobody else had heard ever before. And then when Sting went solo, it was totally different.
Yep, absolutely. I think actually that's a more compelling story to me than Deep Purple, but my heart was in more with Deep Purple.
See, it's hard to only pick one.
That's right.
All right. Well, you know what? Like I said, we're going to do an unscientific poll, but our friends from the Ugly American Werewolf in London podcast, guys, where can we find this, and when do you publish new episodes?
No, thanks. You can find it, of course, wherever you get your podcast. And we are at ugly_werewolf on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on Threads. We're on Facebook. Every Thursday, we put out our weekly Ugly American Werewolf in London. The first of every month, we put out our monthly show, First Concert Memories, where we have a guest on and ask them 20 questions about the first time they saw a particular band and how it changed their life. And it's been a lot of fun. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. And for all you record collectors out there, hey, go check out our sponsor. It's rarevinyl.com. They're based in the UK, but they've got treasures from all over the world. And if you use the code UGLY, you can save 10% off, not one item, but one entire order. I saw somebody on there the other day, bought 12 different picture discs from the 70s and 80s. It cost him $400, but he saved $40.
Well, $40 is $40.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's this week's edition of Rock and Roll Detention. Listeners, remember, get up to metalmayhemroc.com. Join our community. Sign up for the newsletter. And this week, and the next month, or the next week, our brand new merch page is officially debuting. Tons of stuff, hoodies, shirts like these, tumblers, stickers, and maybe a couple other surprises. So again, that's metalmayhemroc.com. For our guests, Mac and Gary from the Ugly American Werewolf, my co-host Metal Walt, I'm the Vernomatic, and this has been Metal Mayhem ROC.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.